Well, first of all, many thanks to you, Emily, for enabling this PI Rights finale to be offered by Zoom. I had hoped we could hold this at the Fall Fair, but this online option does make it possible for anyone interested to join with the writers to hear the results. Now we just have to cross our fingers that the internet stays connected. I was kind of a little worried about that this morning. So it was back in January when I read Pat Carney's book On Island, a collection of short stories on life among coast dwellers, and thought how much I would enjoy reading a book of stories written by PI residents. Back in Ontario, I had run a short story contest as a fundraiser for our Friends of the Library group. It was a success and I had a lot of fun doing it. So after running the idea by Christine Firth and getting support and encouragement from her, I decided to give this a try. PI residents didn't disappoint, and we had 18 stories submitted from 16 writers. $340 was raised, and Kate Riley has added $40 from the PI Library, along with $20 from the PI Community Kitchen Group, for a grand total of $400, which will all go towards the Beacon House build. And if you haven't been up that way recently, it's worth the trip to see the cover, which is now over the back deck. It's beautiful. And I understand they are awaiting the building permit to enable the completion of the renos, which should enable the library to be given much needed additional storage space. Before starting the countdown of the top 10 stories, I just want to say a word about the judging. I did try hard to find a local judge and had conversations with several in the PI literary community and in Nanaimo, and even Pat Carney herself. While all were very supportive, unfortunately no one felt able to take it on. So I turned to a librarian friend who had been one of my judges back in Ontario, and it was her suggestion to have her book club do the judging. They were eager to take this on, so why not? 2 bonuses came out of that. One is a small world story. Not long after I had sent the stories off to Ontario, I received an email from one of the book club members, an old friend who I had worked with for over 10 years. She had retired in 2012 and we only stayed in touch through mutual friends. She knew I had moved out west, but didn't know where. When she started to read about Protection Island, she was so excited because not only has she known David Essig for many years, but one summer had spent 2 weeks here, experiencing all that PI has to offer. So she was able to read the stories through an extra special lens. The other bonus is a young lady who joined the book club named Laurie Twining. Laurie had won prizes in the contests I had run back in Ontario and has gone on to become a published author and respected member of the literary community. Laurie provided some excellent feedback for many of the stories, some of which you will hear me refer to as we hear segments from the top 10, which we're going to do right now. Now, some of the readers will be live. Others, Emily was kind enough to take the time to pre-record. And for those, I make this one suggestion. Should the video and the sound be out of sync, just close your eyes and listen to the story. All right, so we'll get started. In 10th place, we have a fictional story from Suzanne Lamoureux titled The Dream. Suzanne chose to be pre-recorded, so sit back and enjoy.
Okay. Literally, this was a dream. The year is 2020, and the planet is dealing with a pandemic that kills mainly the elderly and infirm. Tucked away in a corner of a city is a place where life is much different. Returning from a grocery run the day before, Lorelei had noticed that a few pieces of plywood from their boarded-up warehouse had come loose. After a quick boat trip from Protection Island, Nick loaded his tools into the cargo area of their Jeep. Should be easy enough to fix, he said, as he started the engine. Put in a few screws and then we can come back to the island and plant those potatoes in the veggie garden. Yes, the carrot and spinach seeds are up, she said. I feel super focused on the food production this year, almost maternal, really. When the state of emergency was declared in BC, March 18th, 2020, it was so very welcome to spend some time in the warm sun digesting the fact that everything had changed. Wow, and Twilight Zone were often repeated, as they both experienced their own internal struggle and came to their current state of acceptance. The last couple of weeks in April, the rain cooled things down to the usual seasonal temperature. Today was the beginning of a week of predicted sunshine. Supposed to hit 22 degrees on Friday, Nick said as they approached the city limits. The city streets were eerily vacant most days now as Lorelei and Nick made their way to the warehouse. The pandemic had caused local government to order a lockdown. Essential trips for food and medicine were the only reasons to leave home or garden. Warehouse security was a welcome diversion to the isolation they were experiencing. You know, we should sell this place and but the market is pretty bad, Nick said. I agree. Maybe just cut our losses and be done with it. The city still wants our taxes, but doesn't seem to find a way to bring the business back, Nick. It sucks. The area around the warehouse had seen better days. Several abandoned cars were missing doors lay rusting in empty lots. Piles of trash littered the street corners, and as their car passes, some of it lifts into the air to settle on the road behind them. For the last several years, there had been a shift in the city. The opioid crisis had well begun, and a few isolated groups of people were walking along the side of the road with their shopping carts. Encampments in parks and vacant lots were scattered throughout the south end of town. Almost all of the mom and pop stores of the previous decade had been pushed out and shut down by the big box stores. Social division was at an all-time high, and poverty was increasing. Graffiti on the sides of boarded-up storefronts was the only color. Some were crude efforts in violent slashes. Many others were quite beautiful in their vivid intricacy. A one-story wall was covered with in a swirling block script that read FU C19. As they pulled up to the building, Lorelei pointed out to Nick the plywood section that needed attention. Strangely enough, the graffiti artist had spared their building. As they stepped out of the Jeep and locked the doors, Lorelei turned toward Nick. We should probably take a look around inside while we're here. It might be a while before we leave the island again. Let's do that first, he said, as he put his arm around her shoulder and they walked towards the entry landing. As she turned the key and pushed the door open, she asked, "Do you smell hot chocolate?" She could just make out some daylight coming in from the edges of the boarded-up window. As Nick flipped the switch, the room came into sharp focus. Against the far wall, there is a small sofa with a blanket thrown over the back. A low table in front has a couple of technical manuals and a half full of popcorn on it. A doll and a handful of marbles were scattered on the worn rug. A big chair sat in the far corner, and a short table covered with childish drawings was beside the door. As they both surveyed the room and then locked eyes, Lorelei exclaimed loudly, "This looks like someone's living room. What's going on here?" "I don't know," he replied. "We better take a look around and find out."
So in the feedback received, note was made of a favorite phrase, communal living where love is stronger than fear. That should give you a hint of what's to come in the story and want to read more. Okay, I'm just moving my thing. Thanks, Suzanne, for having that pre-recorded. Okay, in ninth place is a true story about Protection Island from Agnes Provost, who is the lovely young lady building a house with her husband Denny across from Norm. The story is called Wave to Your Neighbor. Agnes also asked to be pre-recorded.
Hi, my name is Agnes Provo, and I'm going to be reading Wave to Your Neighbor. What about them? I asked Gina. Oh, a lovely, nice old man lives there, she said. I didn't see him then, but Norm was probably watching. You won't have a problem with us building? I asked, worried about stepping on any toes. No, not at all, Gina said confidently. That was the first time I heard about Norm. We ended up purchasing the lot with just a foundation and set off to build where the blueprints that the last owners were going to use. Just last year, my husband and I built a house in Ontario and thought, how hard could it be? It soon became clearer as the city and Nanaimo employee laughed at our estimation completion date of 3 months. You're building in Nanaimo and on protection? He chuckled. He was imagining the progression we would need to go through. I didn't know what a barge was just yet. I found a job quickly at the lawyer's office handling our house transaction, and my husband Denny would be building this tiny home all on his own. I knew about Denny's amazing capabilities, but worried as any good wife would. I would be on a different island if anything were to happen. Denny would go to Protection Island daily, and I started getting phone and text updates of this impressive place every day during work. We learned that Norm, our neighbor, hangs out near the window. We quickly discovered that everyone on the island says hello to Norm when they pass by. Norm always waves back. You can't always see him, so people wait to see the shadow of the wave. People want that wave back. I didn't know Norm's name so well, but it quickly came to become a usual name in my husband and I's conversation. My husband once said that a girl walked by and screamed, "We love you, Norm!" And then I realized he had groupies. I discovered I had someone keeping an eye on my gorilla husband, and it brought me great relief. This older man sat observing and waving.
Thanks, Agnes. So the feedback from the book club about this story is very telling. They absolutely loved the characters. In 8th place is a story from Heather Cooling called The Clock. Heather was not sure if she could participate this afternoon and has asked if I could read from her story. So I'm going to do that. Put my glasses on. The clock. She glances again at the clock placed high up on the kitchen wall. It's browned with red metal trim, the paint dull and flaking in the fetid tropical air. The hands stuck at 12 o'clock. What's wrong with this obsession with the damn clock? It must represent my depressed state, unable to work, unable to function, waiting for something to happen, anything. I can't seem to move, need to get out, get away. The rest of this beachside dive was just as neglected. The dripping shower head, cracked sink tiles, leaking toilet, a thin musty blanket on the squeaky bed. The place was cheap. It was the first hotel they found in this small Mexican town. They had wanted each other so much they never looked further. The only saving grace were the red terracotta floors, so cool and smooth, so beautiful under her feet. Maybe she stayed because at least something was beautiful, compensating in some remote way for his betrayal. He had walked out on her after just 14 days. It's as if the clock were mocking me. Am I going to let this failure stop me from living a future without fear? I knew I wouldn't be able to forget the clock. It was challenging me to get on with life. 6 years earlier, she'd noticed him at the annual summer barbecue. The once-a-year crazy debacle when everyone in the neighborhood in this small prairie town forgot their standing. Reputations lost, boring lives revealed, and judgments made. She lived in the working class district where men like her dad, a mechanic, and her stay-at-home mom spent their entire lives. Even as a kid, she could never understand why her small-town neighbors and parents, honest, straightforward folk, could be so obnoxious and embarrassing. It was easy to ignore this day, the one day a year when the liquor flowed freely. It was her 16th birthday. She had figured it out. She would make it memorable. That story is interesting to keep going. And Lori had given some very positive feedback saying, this author has a fantastic skill with descriptive scenes and tension build up between characters. Lots of amazing imagery. I could easily read an entire novel from this person. That's pretty exciting feedback. Okay, in 7th place is a contemporary fiction from David Essig titled Wooden Shelves. And I believe David will be reading live from his home.
Okay. 2 days later, at their house in North Vancouver, John takes a milk crate of small rocks and seashells from the van into the garage and places it on the wooden shelves that span one wall. Barbara collects things at the beach and brings them home to use as subjects for her paintings. Yesterday, while paddling through the shallow waters that run between Newcastle and Protection Islands, she found fossils, a small group of impressions in a smooth stone about the size of grapefruit. She says they look like shrimp crossed with cockroaches. At dinner, Barbara asks John if there's anyone at the school who could identify the fossils. She thinks they might be trilobites, but would like to know for sure. John calls the science teacher at the school, who tells him that the expert that they're looking for is a paleontologist. She gives him the name and number of a professor at UBC who might be able to help. Barbara calls the professor. He speaks with an Eastern European accent and offers to look at the rocks. He calls them specimens. Certainly, I can come look at your specimens. Just tell me where you're located. Barbara says their address, and he says, with a strong arm, you could throw them to me. I'm just across Lonsdale and a few blocks up the hill from your place. Such a coincidence, he says. And they agreed on a time, and Barbara writes it in her appointment calendar. When the professor arrives, John and Barbara greet him in the driveway. John opens the garage door, and they all walk together to the shelves where John has put the milk crate. He pulls down the crate and hands the rocks to the professor. Indeed, it's a trilobite, he says. It's a fine specimen, probably 300 million years old, but I'd have to take it into the lab to find out for sure. Barbara offers to give it to him, but he declines, saying that his department has a good collection already. No, you keep it, and perhaps it will bring you luck. And now I have a question for you, the professor says. Who built these shells? John says that he built them a couple years ago. He explains they're nothing fancy, just open racks made from 2x4s, spaced to hold the dozens of milk crates that they use for storage in the garage. The professor holds his hands out to the edge of the shelf, as if to feel its dimensions. I used to sleep on one of these. For a year and a half, from the day they picked me up until the Americans liberated the camp in '45. Wooden shelves just like these. We slept on them. Barbara is silent, looking down at her camera, turning it in her hands. And John says something under his breath that sounds like, "Oh my God." And the professor steps away from the shelf and says, "There was no God in there, I'll tell you that." See?
Thanks, David. And again, the feedback was impressive, stating, I love stories about artists and the creative life they lead, especially when they meet up with a paleontologist. This story could be award-winning for sure. It's pretty impressive feedback too. Okay, in sixth place, we have a true PI story from Thora Howell titled Finding One's Place on Earth. Thora also has been pre-recorded.
My name is Thora Howell, and my story is Finding Our Place on Earth. An invitation to have lunch in a beautiful garden on Protection Island was a gift from a charming old Scot, Bill Macy. Bill and his wife Bee had retired and made a home on Protection. Bill was an artist, and his eye for color and contrast was evident. He'd created the garden from a base of coal tiling remnants of bygone coal mining activity on Protection. For many months, Bill had stopped at our bookstore in Nanaimo and repeated an invitation to come for lunch, and he would let me know when. He chose a sunny spring day and whisked us over in his boat. We sat under a flowering tree surrounded by daffodils, jonquils, crocus, tulips, and inhaled the aroma from the apple blossoms as we sipped tea and ate tiny sandwiches cut in four. I was enchanted with the island, a 10-minute ferry ride from the center of Nanaimo. Towering Douglas and grand firs burnished arbutus, and where trees had died, maples grew. Later, I would discover that in June of each year, the island dripped with the white bassy blossoms of seafoam. Some weeks later, then our friends Mark and Liz brought us to the island for dinner. The roads resembled unpaved lanes that wound their way around the island. Mud Bay Park housed the community dock, and smugglers faced east towards Sechelt and Vancouver. The island had been developed by Frank Ney, the mayor, and the names of the roads and parks were straight out of Treasure Island. Each lot that was not situated on the water was on a smaller park filled with salal and Oregon grape. In the spring, native lilies grew everywhere. Over a dinner of lamb roasted over potatoes, we had heard a little of the history of the island and discovered that many people had special names. Concrete Bob had barged 3 houses to the island and secured them with concrete. There was Jim, have I got a deal for you, and the Towering Thunder, who, when he fell off his boat, radioed to his mother, my balls are jingling. We were entranced with all we saw and heard. We discovered that Liz had an exceptional ability to discover properties that were available. Once we expressed an interest, she found a small cabin on a concrete foundation on Captain Morgan's Boulevard on the Salish Sea. The location could not have been better. We immediately made an offer, which was accepted. The challenge came when we found that the person living in the cabin was most unhappy at losing his home. His family owned the property and he was being turfed. We were warned to stay off the lot. I'd noticed during one of the viewings we had of the house that there was a gun on the bedroom wall, so I was not about to trespass. Unable to walk on the property, I gathered my swimming gear, and every day during the month of August I swam from Mugglers to the house. On the day we were to take possession, the real estate agent for the owners did not show up. When we entered the cabin, all of Dave's possessions had been left behind, including his dinner and his boots. A few days later, we were to get a sense of the generosity and kindness of people on protection. The night before we were to take possession, Dave had marched down to the Dinghy Dock pub and announced to everyone present that he intended to burn the cabin down. There are no secrets on protection. Word spread to John Muckle, our nearest neighbor. John, 6'7" of him, was the kind of neighbor everyone dreams of having. In short order, he invited members of the volunteer department to a poker game at his house, and they brought the fire truck. They kept watch over the cabin that night. It did not burn.
So thanks to Thora for that. And book club members found that this story had some fascinating facts. I did too, actually, especially about Treasure Island references. So in 5th place, we have a contemporary fiction story from Deborah Bright titled Seafarer. And I believe Deborah will be reading live.
Deborah Brent.
I'm sorry. I must think you're bright. I should know better.
Okay. They met in Ucluelet at a barbecue get-together of a mutual friend on a sunny Saturday in early July after a month of rain. He stood across from her at the patio, table loaded with assorted salads and condiments. He paused over the potato salad when he noticed her putting her burger together. She looked up when she felt his eyes watching and caught his stare, stopping her action in mid-motion. Sorry, he said, and smiled down at his still naked burger lying on the half bun. Most people put potato chips on the side. She smiled and continued to add chips on the top of her open burger and then squeezed mayonnaise over the chips. She reached towards him to pick up a long slice of pickle and placed it gingerly on the chips, glancing at him as she placed the top bun on and pressed lightly with a crackling sound, then picked up her burger and took a bite. He hadn't taken his eyes off of her. She chewed and then swallowed. I dipped my French fries in my milkshake too, she said, and walked away to sit with a girlfriend. She owned a small sailboat built by a local shipwright, a 28-foot wooden sloop named Island Girl, and moored in Campbell River where she lived. She had sailed her first big voyage last summer, circumnavigating Vancouver Island with 2 friends as crew. In September, he accepted her invitation for a weekend sail to Cortes Island. Out in the choppy waters of the straits, he hid his seasickness and then fought to hide his terror when a short, intense squall hit them before they reached Manson's Landing. After reaching their destination, he watched impressed as she set the anchor. He tried to pay attention as she explained to him what it meant to fall off when sailing upwind. He tried to pay attention when she described to him how to plot a course as they sat in the cockpit with red wine and chips. But his attention was caught up in her brown hair that had curled in the moist, salt air. And then his thoughts pulled him ahead to how the evening would be. Curled in the bunk, he inside her, floating embraced in this wooden half shell on the still dark water. They found a place together that winter on Protection, a tiny island near the city of Nanaimo. Island Girl was tucked safely on her mooring in the waters between Protection and Newcastle Island. During their first winter together, he was coerced out of their warm house for short day sails with her in the cold rain and wind, stuffed into thick cruiser suits, toques, and gloves. He never let on his discomfort, his tensing, queasing stomach whenever a gust pushed Island Girl's shoulder deep down into a tossing, beam-reached sea. "It's okay," she'd yell to him over the wind. "She's a good boat. She's loving this." They would come home chilled through and climb into the hot tub, each with a tumbler of whiskey, and he would listen in mused admiration while she talked of new expeditions, her desire for further shores, bigger oceans, maybe a bigger boat. In the evenings, he would practice his guitar while she studied for her captain's license. The summer that followed, she took him sailing in the Straits of Georgia at any opportunity, exploring the Gulf Islands north and south, threading through the long inlets along the Sunshine Coast. She noted on those trips and then said that he was a fair weather sailor. When he said he supposed that's true, how could she tell? She said, "Because your arm isn't locked around the winch and you're smiling more." He sees he's missed taking her seriously when she would talk to him about crossing oceans. "Sail here, what's wrong with the waters around here?" he said to her. It was all leading to this day at the marina, with them both facing each other on the ramp that led down to the 58-foot sailboat that waited to take her away. The opportunity to crew across the Pacific to New Zealand meant the time had come.
Thanks, Deborah. So people really like the images that that Deborah evoked. And this favorite phrase was noted. To not jump at the chance was like trying to hold a whale in a spider's web. In third place, we have a beautiful piece of creative nonfiction from Helen Bailey titled To a Safer Place. Helen has been pre-recorded.
To a safer place. It's April the 13th. No, it's not a Friday. And I'm lounging in a most comfortable chair in a house on a tranquil island in Canada called Protection Island. Such a reassuring name. The warm early morning sun is shafting directly onto my face, which would be blinding were it not for the fact that I had, unfortunately, lost both my eyes in a fight with a most vicious family dog many years ago. Living through these last 81 years has been, to put it mildly, challenging, certainly interesting, and definitely heart-wrenching, but for the most part, hilariously good fun. But before I invite you into this adventure, I would ask not to be judged by my bedraggled and life-worn appearance. It was inevitable that I would end up with this visage, as I endeavored, may I say successfully, to fulfill my willing duty to whom I was presented those many years ago. On a grey day in September of 1939, I found myself thrust into the arms of a blue-eyed, fair-haired, and confused little girl who couldn't have been more than about 5 years old. She, her brother, and 2 older cousins, and hundreds of other children were being bundled onto a train in London, England, for what I later learned was the beginning of 3 years of evacuation, away from their families for safekeeping at the very start of World War II. It's still hard for me, even now, to forget the tear-stained faces of the jostling crowds of mothers who waved handkerchiefs and hats and as they attempted to catch a last glimpse of their children as the train steamed away to its destination in the Midland County of Cheshire, so far away. "John, Why isn't Mummy coming with us? The little girl asked of the older boy sitting next to us. He took a long while to answer, then raised his head and said quietly, "'Cause she has to stay and look after our house in case." "In case what?" she asked. "In case the enemy come," was his brief reply. That seemed to satisfy her. Until then, I had been observing the unhappy faces of the assortment of other children as I perched on her cardboard gas mask case, which was slung around her slender neck on a thick string. She now picked me up and turned me to face her. "Hello," she said with a shy smile as she gently pulled me towards her, and surprisingly kissed me on my nose. "I'm Millie, and I'm going to call you Teddy." Now, I have to say that I was extremely taken aback by this announcement. I was born into the most eminent Merrythought family with close royal attachments, and was quite prepared and more than ready to undertake my commitments in a manner befitting my status. Surely a moniker like Sir Hector or Alexander or perhaps Lysander would have been more appropriate. But Teddy? I was to learn at that moment that my new charge would be loving and fair, but resolute in her decisions, which would ultimately steer us through many difficult and distressing, though also conversely, joyous situations during our long and equally loyal life together. So Teddy it was. I feel certain by now that my astute readers will have twigged to the fact that I'm a bear. Yes, a teddy bear. Many of our breed, the most unfortunate ones, are adopted by their young owners, only to be discarded when those children grow up. Therefore, I consider myself most privileged to have reached this ripe old age because, fortunately, Millie never has grown up.
Helen, I gotta say, I think I absolutely loved this story, and you almost got me a little touched here. And hearing you read it is absolutely precious. Feedback, one of the things that was mentioned was that this story gives a reminder that small items like a stuffed teddy bear can act as a comfort to a wee one during traumatic events such as war or even a pandemic. Okay, in second place, we have a humorous, creative nonfiction from Valley Hennell with a great title, Cow Poo and Other Parables. Valley is reading live from her home.
I have to say, it's after Helen's story, it seems rather frivolous, however. Meanwhile, back in the Salish Sea, Will's barge delivers 20 bags of philanthropic steer manure to my garden gate, while my 84-year-old Scottish neighbor lugs a literal ton from town by hand, boat, and wheelbarrow. A kilo saved is a kilo earned. Between chopping wood and hauling meadow muffins, my garden guru looks like Mr. Clean and grows enough vegetables to feed the whole neighborhood. Along with robin chirps and hummingbird chatter, his chortle is one of the first signs of spring. I know my neighbors by the sound of their laughter. We all look forward to this annual manure bonanza that feeds our soil and plumps our tomatoes. But no matter how much I order, it's never enough. Which is why I'm dragging home 10-kilo cargo in my granny cart today. Out of the mall and across the parking lot, an urgent jaywalk across the seaside roadway, down the ramp into the waiting room, onto the ferry and off again, up the ramp. Steep ramp. Why is the tide always low on shopping day? across the parking circle and into the golf cart, down Pirates Lane, out of the cart, and through the gate to my garden. By this time, I'm a sweaty but swaggering grandma. My arms ache and my throat is parched, but I can hardly wait to change out of my town shoes and get outside digging. From across the fence, neighbor greets me with a grin and a pitchfork, waving what looks like a peanut butter sandwich in his non-gardening hand. "And what did ye drag home bedraggled this time, young missus?" "Cow poo," I crow. "Bull twaddle," he chuckles. "So I'm betting you'll be brewing a batch of poo stew." Long ago he taught me to concoct fertile elixir by soaking a handful of manure in a bucket overnight. I never touch cow poo in my third favorite dress. Out of nowhere, 5-year-old Mary appears and disdains me in her adamant "don't you know anything" sing-song. I retreat to the potting shed grinning, granny sweat staining my least favorite chin.
Thanks so much, Valerie. And so book club members felt a strong attraction to the people and the place in your story. And it may be interesting to see how many of them include PI in their future travel plans. And that brings us to the first place story, another submission from Deborah Brint. This time, a creative nonfiction story titled Pocket Watch. Deborah.
Thanks. The early morning of September 10, 1918 began like any other within the home of Nanaimo coal miner William. A warm golden light filled one window of his small home, and his wife carried out a well-practiced routine of lighting the stove, preparing some breakfast, and assembling some food to pack into her husband's metal lunch pail. The two sat together for a brief time at the table and spoke to each other in hushed voices to not wake their 3 children still sleeping deep in their beds. Then he got up and left for work, and gently closing the door behind him, he stepped out into the soft breeze of a clear twilight, warm with the remains of summer's end. His home was within the large land parcel of Harewood Estates, purchased by the superintendent for the Vancouver Coal Mining and Land Company, Samuel Robbins. Samuel had cleared acres of forest between the Nanaimo waterfront and Mount Benson to sell affordable 5-acre sections to miner families to farm. It meant William could have a large vegetable garden and keep some livestock to tide his family over during the lean employment periods, or if another mine strike should occur. Samuel was well liked in town, known as the people's friend, and some called him the godfather of Nanaimo. He treated the miners with humanity and dignity, a stark contrast to the labor abuses of the local coal baron, Robert Dunsmuir. William made his way down to the harbor front to wait with the other miners for the tug and scow that would take them the 1 kilometer across the bay to tiny Douglas Island and its mining worksite. The massive mine shaft head frame easily seen at its south end. Once across, the men disembarked the scow and trudged up past Gallows Point, earning its name after 2 Native men were hanged in 1853 for the murder of Peter Brown, a Hudson Bay Company shepherd. The men passed the tiny lamp house on the left and then gathered around the towering head frame to wait their turn to descend below ground and begin their shift. The somber mood of the men was interrupted now and then when someone chuckled from hearing an amusing story or joke. Then once again the air would fill with only the sounds of humming cables and machinery. The elevator cage soon appeared up out of the blackness. Its metal gate shuddered open and released a surge of 16 tired men, looking like charcoal drawings come to life. The whites of their eyes flickered and blinked into the bright new day, the pores of their faces plugged with black coal dust and sweat. All of them wearing the relief of being done their night shift and eager to go to their homes and beds. As soon as the cage emptied, a fresh exchange of men filled it again, shoulder to shoulder. Their clean scrubbed faces looked forward through the bars of its gate as it closed them in. With a quick jolt and the hum, the thick wire cable lowered them down. Those standing above could glimpse the yellow glow of headlamps being flicked on one by one, the only visible trace left of them as the shaft swallowed the men down the hole of its dark throat, 550 feet into the black web of tunnels that extended out under the seabed. Working deep below the ocean floor, they could feel the rumble of CP ships plying the waters above, regular enough to set a watch by. Men waiting their turn above ground were bone-tired from the endless repetition of hard work. Some stood silent, still groggy from sleep, or lack of it. One miner had his gaze transfixed on the sun just crowning the bluffs of Gabriola. Soon he and the others will have to leave its ascent without them, to retreat into the small halo circle of their headlamps, the coming hours of hewing and clawing at the black seams for the hope and promise of a better life, a future. William stopped to fish his watch out of his pocket and wind it before going down, and it caused him to miss a place in the emptied cage as men skirted around him and packed in. Someone called out to him in jest that he's holding up the line. The cage descended without him on its 6th drop of the morning, and it wasn't yet 7 o'clock. While he waited his next turn, he was remembering the conversation with his wife that morning about their son Billy starting a new grade, and his feeling anxious. His wife said, "He'll be fine, he can smile his way through any adversity." And as she smiled, William saw Billy's face in hers and said, "Thank goodness he takes after you." William knew at that moment Billy would be getting up and ready for school. He held the firm hope that his son would get a good education that could save him from a future of backbreaking, dangerous labor of a miner. William was only 28, but he felt ancient already. The cage came up and again emptied. Now William, along with 15 others, shuffled in and filled the cage again. He jockeyed his body into a tight space between Caleb and Angelo, 2 men like many other miners there who left their homelands behind. Some brought their wives with them, others had married after settling in Nanaimo. William knew that 14 of these men in the cage were married with children. John had the biggest brood with 7, and Robert was a struggling widow with 5 children to tend to. William often saw a look of worry in his eyes. He couldn't imagine losing his wife. He'd be lost. I'll stop there, I guess.
Thanks, Deborah. So this true PI story, it's heartbreaking, but it's a good reminder of how only a few minutes either way can alter the course of our life. And I almost think it should be a mandatory reading for all PI residents. And once you read the whole story, you'll know why. Anyway, congratulations, Deborah, for 2 winning entries. And congratulations to all of today's readers. But before we go, I also want to highlight the other 8 stories which were submitted. My understanding is there were many differences of opinion amongst the book club members, which isn't surprising given that we all prefer different styles, authors, and genres. And all 18 stories received votes to be in the top 10. I am hoping to publish a book of these short stories as another fundraiser, hopefully to be ready for Christmas. And more than the top 10 today will be included. So for instance, there's a humorous story from Bev Jones, which all enjoyed, as a lovely homage to a friend, which was Jerry Howell. There's a lively tale with the title Peanut Butter, Guns, and Hijacking from Jim Irvin, which I'm intrigued to find out. I'm not sure whether it's true or not, so I'll have to talk to Jim about that one. There's a thought-provoking story called Homecoming from Gerald Halabura. There's a nonfiction from Corey Hansen, which everyone who plans to own a boat on PI should read, called The Commute. A story called COVID Fitness was submitted by none other than Denise Bonin and is sure to get you energized. Thora submitted a second story about the time Doris Lessing visited Protection Island, which is very interesting. And Trudy Chapman's submission, titled A Spring Adventure in the Salish Sea, is almost a travelogue, and suggestion was made that we should print it separately and sell it to visitors of the island. Anyway, I hope this has whet your appetite to buy the book once published. Stay tuned around that. I will be back in touch with all the writers and providing you with even more feedback. I'm being slowed down a little bit on the computer right now because I have this broken wrist, but I've only got 2 more weeks and then the cast can come off and so I can start working on things again. And Emily, I couldn't have done this without you. Many, many thanks to you for all the pre-recording and the time you spent and for organizing this today. Many thanks to all of those who participated and who submitted stories. And those of you who are just listening in, thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.